What's up, everybody, and welcome into the Valley Experience podcast, an Arizona sports podcast between two diehard Arizona sports fans. I'm Ryan Pasiecznik. He's Logan Lober. And Logan, there's a lot of news that happened this week revolving around the sports world. A lot of firsts as the Nuggets and the Golden Knights clinched their first championship. And also, of course, the Bradley Beal news. I'm excited to be here with you and really dive into just all of the situations and talk about just all the amazing things that happened this week.
Absolutely, man. We got a lot of news going on, especially regarding the Suns. Just as of a few hours ago, some big news dropping about Bradley Beal and the Suns. We're definitely going to get into all of that. But before we do, just want to thank all you guys for listening to the last episode. If you didn't, make sure to go check that out. And if you didn't listen to our first episode too, go ahead and check that out as well. But we're glad to have you all back for episode 3, and we're excited to get into it.
Absolutely. And with that, I want to just kind of start off by talking about obviously what I mentioned in the intro about the Nuggets and the Golden Knights winning their first championship in franchise history. And for Denver, I mean, they really had to scratch and claw their way through it in game 5. There definitely was some controversy at the end of that game when Aaron Gordon fouled Jimmy Butler, but even though it really wasn't. But credit to the Denver Nuggets. They were the best team in the Western Conference the entire season long. Nikola Jokic is just an otherworldly player. I mean, for a guy that can shoot the ball like he's Dirk Nowitzki, pass the ball like he's Magic Johnson, and rebound the ball like he's Dennis Rodman, he's a center that we've never seen throughout an entire lifetime and probably will never see ever again. So kudos to him. Kudos to Jamal Murray as well. He's someone that really had to overcome a lot of adversity from tearing his ACL in April of 2021, sitting out the entire season last year, and then working his way back up to being that dominant player that he once was beforehand. Credit also to Michael Porter Jr. as well for just everything that he had to go through as well. I mean, he was touted as being one of the top prospects coming out of high school, and then he had that devastating back injury. He was out for most of the season last year as well. And then I think probably tip of the cap as well has got to be Mike Malone. He's a guy that took over the Nuggets franchise in 2015. Really stayed patient through the entire process, and as a result, he ended up being a championship-winning head coach. So, kudos to the Nuggets. But since we're here and we're talking about teams of winning like their first championship, I want to talk about 5 teams that are most deserving of winning a championship. And I have a list of 5 teams that are here. So at number 5, in my personal opinion, the team that is most deserving of winning a championship, number 5, the Seattle Mariners. Throughout their time, they've had some of the best players in MLB history. You think about guys like Edgar Martinez, A-Rod, Randy Johnson, Ken Griffey Jr., and Ichiro Suzuki. Considering the franchise has been around since 1977, they've made the playoffs 5 times during that span, which featured 3 American League Western Division titles and 2 wildcard berths. In 2001, they set the American League record for most wins in a season with 116 and tied the all-time record for most wins in a season, which is shared by the 1906 Chicago Cubs. This past year, they made the postseason for the first time since that heartbreaking ALCS loss to the Yankees in 2001 and look to have a bright future ahead with franchise cornerstone Julio Rodriguez. I hope the Mariners get a chance to win a title for a fan base that has suffered long enough because they deserve it. What do you think, Logan?
Yeah, that's that. When you let me know this was something you were making a list for, the Mariners were definitely one of the teams that came to mind. Yeah, they're really fun to watch last year. Glad they're able to break the playoff drought, and they got a nice squad this year too. So hopefully they're not in for another couple decades of missing the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, and it's like you think about just all of the great players that have come through that franchise, like I mentioned beforehand. You really hope for a guy like Julio Rodriguez to really just break that trend of great players going to the Mariners and not necessarily having their careers wasted, but just not being able to get that one accolade that sometimes can make a player great and having that championship ring. Alrighty, at number 4, we have the Minnesota Vikings. Since the franchise was founded in 1961, they have made the playoffs 31 times, won 21 division titles, and made 4 Super Bowl appearances. They have one of the greatest defensive lines in NFL history with Carl Eller, Jim Marshall, Gary Larson, Alan Page, and Doug Sutherland, aka the Purple People Eaters, and the all-time interceptions leader in Paul Krause. Adrian Peterson is probably the greatest running back of our generation, or at least top three from that era. And Justin Jefferson might be the best receiver of the century and probably could be in the conversation about being the greatest of all time when his career is over. I'd also like to mention that the franchise holds the record for the largest comeback in NFL history by overcoming a 33-point deficit to the Indianapolis Colts, in which they achieved this past season. Vikings fans are some of the best in all of sports, and they have suffered enough in the bitter Minnesota cold, compiled with multiple heartbreaking losses in the playoffs, which is why I say, Skull! May the Vikings win a Super Bowl in the future.
Yeah, another good one. The Vikings had to take a back seat for a long time with Green Bay kind of running that division. So now obviously it's a very different Packers team without Aaron Rodgers. So, now the Vikings have the best chance, maybe they've ever had with the squad that they got. So yeah, another good selection there.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see how the Vikings run game is going to look like. I mean, I'd have to assume that Alexander Mattison is going to be the lead guy for them moving forward since they just got rid of Dalvin Cook. But Kirk Cousins, I think, is a very underrated quarterback. He's a guy that, obviously is super efficient with the ball. He's just been a guy that hasn't been able to get over that hump in the playoffs. I mean, you just look at this past season. Who would have expected that the Vikings would have gotten knocked out by the New York Giants, with all due respect to them? The Vikings, I thought, were clearly the more deeper, better team. And I think that's always going to be a knock on Kirk Cousins up to this point. I mean, he still has maybe a few more years left of him, like probably being at the top of his game, but we'll see if he's able to go and win that Super Bowl, because that's been the thing that's plagued him up to this point. At number 3, we have the Cleveland Browns. While the Browns did win 4 NFL championships, it was 4 NFL merger, which happened in 1970 and set the scene for the NFC and AFC. Cleveland is notoriously known for its heartbreaking playoff losses, such as Red Right 88, The Drive, and The Fumble. On top of that, in 1995, a season that had high expectations for the Browns to be legitimate Super Bowl contenders, former owner Art Modell announced that at the conclusion of the season, he would move the team to Baltimore. The franchise was then named to the Baltimore Ravens in 1996, and 4 years later, the team won the Super Bowl, defeating the New York Giants. After a 3-year absence, the Browns were reborn as an expansion franchise in 1999 and have made the playoffs twice since that time. In 2017, the franchise went 0-16, which marked the third time a team had gone winless in a regular season since the 2008 Detroit Lions, and the third time in the AFL-NFL merger. Browns fans are diehard fans. Throughout thick and thin, they have shown up and supported their team regardless of their record. I can only imagine how painful it must have been to see their team relocate to Baltimore and win the Super Bowl shortly thereafter, especially since they've been manifesting it for a long time. I don't know if we'll ever see a Browns Super Bowl parade in our lifetime, but it certainly would be a sight for many sore eyes.
You mentioned their success or lack thereof in our lifetime. They've definitely been one of the worst teams in all the major sports that we've experienced over the last, our lifetimes, with their, what was it, 1-31 or something. They were 1-15, and then they went right into 0-16. So they've had a lot of downs in our lifetimes, but they've been a solid team the last couple of years. It was fun to watch them come back to life with Baker, a couple playoff appearances there, and now with Deshaun Watson, it's pretty good team. So hopefully no more of the 1-30 seasons.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just for the Browns. You just touched upon it as well about them having Deshaun Watson and Baker Mayfield previously beforehand. It's just been so unfortunate for the Browns because they've had a constant revolving door at quarterback ever since they were reborn as a franchise again. I mean, they had Tim Couch, who was really being propped up to be the next great one, and he turned out to be a bust. Although I think that there's a lot of reasons behind that because the Browns just didn't surround him with a lot of talent, and he wasn't in the best situation. You think about Jeff Garcia, who was really solid with the 49ers. The Browns signed him after the 2003 season, and he was a guy that never seemed to take it off. Um, they also had former Cardinals quarterback Derek Anderson, who was pretty solid for them in the '07 season, but then he really couldn't amount to anything. Then you think about guys. I mean, you go down the list like Brady Quinn, a lot of expectation for him to be a good quarterback. Johnny Manziel, obviously Johnny Football at Texas A&M, one of the most electrifying college football players we've ever seen. Then you even look at some of the other guys too. I mean, they drafted DeShone Kizer, which he never really amounted to anything. And last time I checked, I thought that he was with the Packers. So, and then they had Baker Mayfield, which I thought he was going to be a guy that was going to really be their franchise cornerstone. And it really sucks. I mean, unfortunately, that wasn't the case. And now they have Deshaun Watson, and maybe if they can surround him with enough talented pieces, because the Browns do have, some really good offensive weapons to really build around Deshaun Watson. Maybe they can be a contender in the future. All right, moving in at number 2, the Buffalo Bills. Like the Browns, the Bills have won 2 championships, except it was when they were part of the American Football League. The franchise was home to the NFL's all-time sack leader in Bruce Smith for 15 seasons, and the first player in NFL history to rush for 2,000 yards in a season, a feat accomplished by none other than O.J. Simpson. During the '70s and early '80s, the Bills endured multiple losing seasons and very little playoff appearances. It wasn't until the late '80s when the Bills started to become legit title contenders behind the likes of head coach Marv Levy, quarterback Jim Kelly, running back Thurman Thomas, wide receiver Andre Reed, and defensive end Bruce Smith. In 1990, the franchise made its first Super Bowl appearance against the New York Giants, but lost in heartbreaking fashion when Bills kicker Scott Norwood missed a potentially game-winning field goal wide right of the goalpost. Buffalo went on to lose 20-19. After the heartbreaking loss to the Giants, the Bills managed to make 3 consecutive Super Bowl appearances, but they didn't come close within reach as their average margin of defeat was 22 points. After their 4 straight Super Bowl appearances, Buffalo made the playoffs 4 more times during the '90s. Their last one came during the 1999 wildcard playoffs, which ended in a 22-16 defeat to the Tennessee Titans, a game famously known as the Music City Miracle, when Titans wide receiver Kevin Dyson scored a touchdown off a lateral pass from Frank Wycheck off a kickoff return setup in the waning seconds of the game. Buffalo went on to miss the next 17 seasons until finally making it back in 2017. Luckily, the Bills got some much-needed help when they drafted franchise quarterback Josh Allen with the 7th overall pick in 2018 and traded for star wide receiver Stephon Diggs 2 seasons later. Since that time, Buffalo has once again established themselves as legit Super Bowl contenders, but still have been unable to get over that hump. Like Browns fans and Vikings fans, Bills fans have watched their team suffer through heartbreak and pain. Bills Mafia might qualify for being the most passionate fan base in the NFL, as they will do anything to see a Vince Lombardi trophy be hosted in their city. I'm confident that this will happen sooner rather than later, and when it does, then the whole country might be jumping up and breaking up tables in celebration of these incredible feat. What do you think, Logan?
The Bills definitely had to be up there. I mean, anytime you go to a Super Bowl 4 years in a row and you lose all 4 times, I mean, you got to be deserving to get one after that. And kind of similar situation that I touched on with the Vikings. It seems like the Bills are always like, especially the last couple of years, they're either 1 or 2 games away from getting to the Super Bowl, and it's either been Pat Mahomes or last year with Joe Burrow in their way. So they're right there. I think this year, I mean, they're one of the favorites, obviously, to not only make but win the Super Bowl. So definitely another good pick there at number 2.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, and Josh Allen, I mean, he's probably like the next upcoming of Ben Roethlisberger. I mean, he's a guy that is just an incredibly athletic quarterback. Um, but you also look at the 2 guys that you just named there, and Pat Mahomes and Joe Burrow. I really think that that's probably going to be the upcoming battle of Peyton Manning and Tom Brady 2.0. because I think right now Pat Mahomes is Tom Brady and Joe Burrow is Peyton Manning. And I think that, I mean, the Bills hopefully should find a way to get over that hump because, like we mentioned, I mean, Buffalo is just an incredible sports town, especially when it comes to Bills fans and their diehard fandom as well. So hopefully that can come sooner rather than later. And next year or this upcoming season can ultimately be the year that Buffalo takes it all.
I'm interested to see who you got at number one. I wonder who.
Yeah. Okay. At number one, the Phoenix Suns. Now, I might have a little bit of bias in putting the Suns as number one, but there is a lot of truth behind it. Founded in 1968, the Suns have made the playoffs 32 out of their 55 years of existence and are the longest standing NBA franchise without a championship. Phoenix has made the NBA Finals 3 times in their history. The first being in 1976 against the Boston Celtics, the second being in 1993 against the Chicago Bulls, and of course, more recently in 2021 against the Milwaukee Bucks. All ended in heartbreaking fashion, coincidentally in 6 games, with plays that will go down as some of the most memorable in finals history. None more so than perhaps John Paxson's game-winning three-pointer at the top of the wing in Game 6 of the 1993 Finals against the Chicago Bulls. That was the closest anyone had come in reach of beating the great Michael Jordan and the closest the Suns had to come to winning a championship. I'd also like to mention that out of the 32 times the Suns made the playoffs, 15 of them who knocked the Suns out went on to win the finals, the most recently being the Denver Nuggets. It's no secret that we've had our fair share of Heartbreak Hotel here in the Valley, especially since we have come so painstakingly close to hoisting up the Larry O'Brien Trophy. There have been many great players that have come through the Valley that were unable to accomplish that feat, most notably Charles Barkley and Steve Nash. Suns fans are some of the best in the NBA and all of sports. And if you're looking for evidence, look at the parade that was put on when they lost the 93 finals. It was literally 100 degrees out there, and people were packed all throughout downtown Phoenix showing their support for the team. Even with the recent success that they've had. After an 11-year playoff drought, the fans came out and showed support when the Suns had the magical run in 2021. I share the same feeling as many other Suns fans do, that I am so sick and tired of being the bridesmaid and not the bride, which is why, as the sun continues to rise in the east and set in the west, I hope that the Phoenix Suns will someday be crowned NBA champions and that it happens sooner rather than later.
I couldn't say it better myself. I don't have much to add, obviously, because I mean you hit on it all. You could say we're biased, but honestly, I don't care if that's what you think because I would do anything for the Suns to win a championship. I mean, every year that passes in 2021, we realize just how close we were and how far it seems at times. The Suns. Obviously, we're gonna get into a lot about the Suns coming up here shortly, but they're in a good spot. But I mean, you can't lie. At times, it feels like, man, we really had a good chance in 2021, and now it's you never know when you're gonna go on a 20-year playoff drought. It can happen at any time. So yeah, I think the Suns have every right to be number one on this list. You can ask any Suns fan out there, they just want to see one. That's it. Just one
Yeah,
championship.
I know for a fact I definitely do. I mean, look, I would be fine with more than one, but just one.
Yeah.
Because Logan, you and I share that same exact sentiment that that finals loss just puts such a bitter, bitter taste in our mouth because of how close we were. Especially when you consider that we had a 2-0 series lead and managed to lose the next four. And the one play that I will never forget that still haunts me to this day is when Devin Booker brought the ball up out of backcourt, and when Drew Holiday stripped him and Giannis had that transition dunk. That is the one play that still to this day haunts my soul, which is why, hopefully, with the news today that we're about to touch upon, might make the Suns championship contenders next year and into the future because we need it. We need a championship so bad.
Absolutely. Yep. I mean, I put it on my Twitter. You know, you mentioned I don't even like remembering it or talking about it, but it is what it is. But the play you just brought up, the stolen by Holiday instance, in the Denver Miami game, right at the end when Jimmy Butler had that turnover, that just instantly gave me flashbacks to I put on my Twitter. I was like, yeah, that just brought me right back to the stolen by Holiday moment. So it's rough. I mean, there's a lot of moments in that series, especially that just leave a bad taste in your mouth. But like you said, with the news today, maybe maybe we're not as far as we think we are sometimes to getting back to a championship.
Hopefully that's the case because moving on, but staying with the Phoenix Suns, multiple reports have confirmed, and I think it was Shams Charania who first brought it up, that Bradley Beal, the star guard for the Wizards, is currently looking at teams to be traded to, and the Heat and the Suns are currently in the running to be potential landing spots for Beal. Now, I was, just kind of looking over this to go and see what could be some trade scenarios for the Suns and Bradley Beal. And a few of them that I pulled from PHNX's Gerald Bourget, who does an excellent job of really breaking down this stuff and wrote an amazing article too, by the way. Um, he said that what you could do is you could trade either Landry Shamet and Chris Paul for Bradley Beal. You could trade Chris Paul and Deandre Ayton for both Beal and Daniel Gafford. Gafford, of course, is a 6-year center who started 47 out of the 78 games he played this year with an overall field goal percentage of just around 73%, an average 9 points per game. Gafford's contract is right around $12.4 million, so that kind of evens it out if you're looking to trade both Ayton and Paul. Or, I mean, this one definitely sounds good. You could trade Chris Paul and DeAndre Ayton for Bradley Beal and Kyle Kuzma. But the only way that becomes possible is if Kyle Kuzma opts to his $13 million player option, because Kuzma is an upcoming free agent this year, and I'm not sure if he's restricted or unrestricted. But that last trade certainly sounds pretty good. I mean, but regardless, though, it's going to put the Suns in a sticky situation when it comes to their cap space. They're already tied up with Booker and Durant now. And I don't know, man. I mean, it'd be cool to have Bradley Beal on this team. But the question becomes, is he the right guy to add on a team that severely lacks depth and costs a lot of money? What are your thoughts, Logan?
Yeah, well, I have a lot of thoughts about this situation. I think if the question is, would you want Bradley Beal on the Suns? I think your answer has to be yes. I mean, 2 years ago, Beal averaged 31 points a game. So I think if it's just, just straight up, would you like Bradley Beal to be on the Suns? Absolutely. There are a lot of factors that, would change people's opinion. One being the contract, one, how would they fill out the rest of the roster? Who's gonna be the point guard? Where's the defense gonna come from? A lot of that plays into people not necessarily wanting to make this deal for Bradley Beal. And, I get that. But I think under the right deal, I'm all in for Bradley Beal under the right circumstance. Now, what that right circumstance is, in my opinion, if you are somehow, which sounds crazy, but I'll get into why it really isn't that crazy, is the Chris Paul and Landry Shamet for Bradley Beal trade. If that is the deal for Bradley Beal, that is an absolute win, in my opinion, for the Suns. And once again, for the aggressive Mat Ishbia. Yeah. So if you can trade Chris Paul and Shamet for Beal, I think you absolutely do that. As I said earlier, people are going to say that's crazy. Well, it really isn't that crazy because Beal has a no trade clause. So he basically is acting like a free agent right now, where he's going to go to the Wizards and say, this is where I want to go. And you pretty much just have to accept what you're going to get back no matter what. So, yeah, you would think that the Wizards would be able to do a little bit better than Chris Paul and Landry Shamet. But if you look at it from their perspective, by moving off of Beal, you're basically confirming that you're going into a full rebuild. So now you got $200 million off your hands, and now you're free to just start over. Obviously, I would assume that Chris Paul would be bought out by the Wizards and free to sign where he wants. But yeah, if the deal is Chris Paul and Shamet for Beal, I'm all for it. Another reason why I would absolutely be for Paul and Shamet for Beal is because then you still have DeAndre Ayton, and you can use Ayton to go and answer some of those questions I said before, as in where's the depth and where's the defense. So if you're able to not include Ayton in that trade and then move Ayton to a different team to get more pieces, then you got yourself a nice team.
No, those are all really good points, Logan, and I completely agree with you on all of them. And I think really just to sum it up, they of course have Sam Cooper, who is on the timeline pod with Mike Behill, and I saw this tweet that he sent out, and he said, "Who needs depth? Give me 3 stars and 12 dudes from LA Fitness." I mean, because I mean that's pretty much the scenario that you most likely would have if you go out and get Bradley Beal. I mean, there definitely are some good things into having Bradley Beal. I mean, first of all, he is a proven superstar in this league. He's someone that averaged 30 points per game a couple seasons ago. He's been in not really the best situation in Washington. Really, I mean, his backcourt mate for years was, of course, John Wall. And I mean, obviously, he's no longer with the team. I mean, they traded for Russell Westbrook in 2020, and that didn't really seem to pan out, even though the Wizards did make the playoffs that year as the eighth seed. They got knocked out by Philly. Um, I also look at it as well that you also have some concerns here because Bradley Beal has also missed a lot of games over the past couple of seasons as well. So health, I think, is certainly going to be a factor when you go out and you get a guy like Bradley Beal. But I think that there's certainly a lot to like. I mean, look, as previously stated, he is just a superstar player. He's one that, I mean, certainly could come in and be a nice third option between both Durant and Booker. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I mean, the question of will it happen, I think obviously still lingers on right now. But hey, I mean, the fact now that we went from being a franchise to that was basically at the bottom of the league a few years ago, and now we're talking about acquiring superstars like Bradley Beal because now you get to add him to 2 other superstars in both Book and KD. Doesn't get any better than that.
Absolutely. And another thing to add is, we've talked a lot about what the Suns are going to do with both Ayton and Chris Paul this offseason and previous episodes. And, from reports before the Beal situation is that, the market for those two guys was pretty questionable. We didn't really know if we'd be able to significantly upgrade this roster by moving those two guys. So, yeah, there's a lot of risks to acquiring Beal, with the contract and the depth and all that stuff. But I would absolutely take Bradley Beal over a DeAndre Ayton trade where we just get like, a couple bench guys without if trading Ayton to get a couple bench guys with Beal, obviously, yeah, I like that. But if you're trading Ayton for guys that aren't really helping your roster, and you're trading an older Chris Paul for guys who you don't really know how well they're going to help, obviously, I will take the Bradley Beal deal and deal with the rest after that.
Yeah, I mean, and even when you get rid of DeAndre Ayton, there still are some really intriguing names that are in free agency. I mean, there's Brooke Lopez, there's Mason Plumlee. And so, I mean, you could easily fill that center position if you needed to. And certainly it wouldn't cost you as much as like what you're paying DeAndre Ayton now to find a guy in free agency on a much cheaper deal. But yeah, I mean, the main thing here, which kind of makes me a little bit skeptical about this whole deal, is what the Suns are going to give up and what the Wizards are going to give in return. Because if we're just, simply talking about a trade here that it's Beal and Kyle Kuzma for maybe Chris Paul and DeAndre Ayton, that's something I'd certainly be willing to look at. Because both of those guys, I mean, especially Kyle Kuzma, he's had experience playing with Frank Vogel when he was in Los Angeles, and he's a great role player to have on your team. Um, because, look, while it'd be nice to add that third superstar to your team as well, you also got to factor in, too, that the Suns also need to go and build depth on their team as well, because that's something that I think, really got the best of them in that Nuggets series. And you saw it that they got exposed. So it's going to be. I'll tell you what. If the right deal comes around, I wouldn't. And I'm the Suns, and it's beneficial for both sides. I wouldn't hesitate to pull the trigger. Now that Logan and I talked about all of the trade scenarios about Bradley Beal potentially coming to the Suns, let's talk about what it might actually look like if Bradley Beal ends up on the Suns. So we've been wondering about that because there have been a lot of people that are out there that say, well, how can you trade for Bradley Beal? He plays basically the same exact position as Devin Booker does. And this is a tweet according to John Gambadoro, our very own Arizona sports host, who said that you could probably most likely see Bradley Beal be a ball handler. He was that when he was in Washington, or you also have Point Book as well. We kind of saw Book take over the point guard duties after Chris Paul went down in the Nuggets series. So it's definitely not out of question about them developing chemistry together. It's just, I think, going to be a question about who's going to run the point.
Yeah, I definitely think it's like, I mean, it's a valid question. Technically, there's not a traditional point guard on the roster if that trade were to go down, at least a starting caliber point guard, that is. But obviously, you mentioned Beal is very capable of being a ball handler, and Devin Booker is very capable of being a ball handler. You mentioned Point Book. This has kind of been a thing that's just been brewing over the last 5 years or so. I would say it started all when the Suns just were not able to add a NBA caliber point guard to the roster at all. So like they're kind of out of options. It was like, well, we might as well just have Booker be the point guard. He showed some good signs during that time, and then obviously Chris Paul came along, and now I think is the best time, if ever, to officially start the point book movement, I guess you would say. Booker has been able to learn from Chris Paul over the last couple of years, and who better to learn from than Chris Paul when it comes to point guard duties? So, the last couple of years, Booker's been able to, average about 4, 5, 6 assists a game. Who's to say, really running the point guard position, who's to say he can't put up 7 or 8 assists? I mean, he has made some incredible passes over the years that not even traditional point guards would be able to make. So his playmaking ability is very underrated. Most people know him as a scorer, but his playmaking is really underrated. And I think if Booker was called upon to sort of move into that point guard role, I think there would be no issues at all with that.
That's a really interesting point. The only thing that I fear is if the Suns decide to go and move Book into that starting point guard role, is you don't want to wear him out or like change his playing style because look, we know Book, like you just said, Logan, that we know him as being that elite scorer on the team. That's something that he's been relied upon to do ever since he got drafted by the Suns. And look, there's no doubt in my mind that he wouldn't be able to handle the workload or the role of playing the point guard on this team. But it's just, I think, all a matter about like how much is that going to change his playing style and how much is that going to really exhaust him, on a nightly basis, because you can't constantly have the ball in his hands and having him be the one to go and create his shots and facilitate and all of that stuff. I mean, you got to also like give it to your superstars as well, which I mean, he's going to have Kevin Durant to be able to do that as well. But it just goes back to like, what we were talking about beforehand, that you don't want those two guys to be your primary scorers, which I mean, hypothetically speaking, if you do have Bradley Beal on that team, then maybe he can take that workload off of those two guys and maybe evenly distribute the ball in a way that each of them get their points on a nightly basis. So it's going to be interesting. It'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention you brought up that tweet from Gambo. I actually wanted to pull up another one of his tweets too, which I thought was pretty interesting. Where Gambo reported that he heard that the Bucks also have interest in Beal, in addition to the Suns and potentially the Heat. Um, but the only thing with the Bucks is that, and this is according to Gambo, is that the Pelicans own the Bucks draft in 2024, 2025, 26, and 27. And then he ends that tweet by saying, I wonder if the Suns' best chance is if Beal says he only wants to play in Phoenix, which we've heard that before. It reminded me a lot that that last sentence right there reminded me a lot of the Kevin Durant situation, which is still all pretty fresh in our minds, is that the Suns might not have the best package to go out and get these star players, but it's a star driven league, whether you like it or not. And if the star wants to be in Phoenix, there's a pretty good shot that he's going to end up in Phoenix. And I think the no trade clause in Beal's contract plays a huge part in this. And if Bradley Beal wants to be in Phoenix, then the Wizards they're just going to have to accept it. They're not going to get a lot back, but that's just how it is. You don't I mean, as a Suns fan, we know a lot about messy front offices and messy organizations. So you don't want to obviously you want to stand your ground, try to get the best deal done for you. But if Beal comes to you and says it's Phoenix, or I hold out, I just hang out at home until you guys finally figure out that your only option is this team, then if you do that, you just got a whole mess on your hands. So yeah, it sucks that you're not going to be able to get the value that you think a Bradley Beal trade would get you. But at the end of the day, you just got to make the deal and just go into your rebuild and try to, build your team back up. So it definitely reminds me a lot of the Kevin Durant situation. And he talked about just how it stinks for the Wizards.
Oh
And
yeah.
it just Devin Booker had his chance to leave many times and he never did. And it just is a huge testament to who he is as a player and as a person who was committed even when times were very rough. He was committed to bringing a championship team to Phoenix. And look where we are now. We're on the other side of these players wanting to force their way out of their situation and come to Phoenix. And, yeah, there's going to be a lot of stuff to figure out if Bradley Beal does come to Phoenix, but hey, it's a way better situation to be in than the Wizards or any other teams at the bottom. So I will never take Devin Booker for granted. And if this deal gets done, I'll never take Mat Ishbia for granted either, because this man is we'll see how this all turns out down the line, these aggressive moves. But hey, at the end of the day, the Suns have, when we talked about this in the opening segment, the Suns have 0 championships. So you can be mad at Ishbia maybe being over aggressive, but we're trying to get the first championship here in Phoenix. So I'll take Ishbia being a little over aggressive, if you even want to call it that. It's my little rant there.
Well, well said, Logan. Very well said right there. Amen to all of that. Because and touching upon, just, your point about just Phoenix being a free agent destination again, that's what I think is just the best in it because I get so sick and tired of people putting down Phoenix. I mean, they always think that we're some big dust bowl in the desert. Well, you know what? No, we're more than that. Okay. Phoenix is one of the best cities in the country. Okay. We have so much that is attractive here. We have great weather on a yearly basis. So, yes, thank you. Thank you for saying that. I mean, and more so to also your point about Devin Booker as well. I that couldn't have been said any better, bro, because you're right. Book had so many chances to go and force his way out of Phoenix, but he saw a vision. He looked at this place and said, you know what? This is where I could make my legacy. And something that really makes me emotional is that when Al McCoy was at Sanderson Ford the day after the Suns lost the finals, or not the finals, but they got knocked out by the Nuggets. I had a chance to go and talk with him, and he was on the Burns and Gambo show with an interview, just discussing his experience and talking about close player relationships. The player that he said he's become really close to is Devin Booker. And the reason why is because when Al McCoy was inducted into the Ring of Honor, which I believe was 2017, all the other players had gone into the locker room, but Devin Booker stayed out there and he was watching Al McCoy just get showered with this amazing love. Because look, it's no secret, Al McCoy is the epitome of Phoenix Suns basketball. Just, I mean, he's been there through the good, the bad, and the heartbreak hotel, as he would say. And Al was saying that Devin Booker came up to him and said, this is what I want to do. Like, I want to, like, you're one of the reasons why I'm here. And he wants to go and have that same exact legacy that Al McCoy would have. And it just speaks to the maturity level that Devin Booker had at a young age. I mean, it's no secret that this guy has been grossly lowballed and underappreciated ever since his time in the league, just because the Suns have been an absolute dumpster fire in his time being here, and because he hasn't gotten the recognition because of that. So kudos to Devin Booker. I think at the end of the day, when his career is done, that he's going to be regarded as the greatest Phoenix Sun of all time. If he's not already in that conversation now, kudos to Devin Booker, man. He is. I mean, outside of Mat Ishbia and James Jones, you also really got to give him probably the most credit for the Suns being in this type of position because he stuck with it through all of those tumultuous years.
Once again, couldn't agree with you more. I think going back to just potential Beal trade and how this would all play out, I think once again it goes back to the move to get Kevin Durant. When that happened, I remember, listen to, Suns guys' opinions on it and how this was going to play out. And one of the, I think it was actually, I think Flex brought it up on his podcast where he said Durant's not going to be the only superstar move that Phoenix makes. This is just more superstars are going to follow. When Durant's contract comes off the books in a few years, that's another 40 million to go spend on another superstar. So, all these things are lined up, and I think for many years to come, as long as number one's in Phoenix, superstars, any NBA player is going to want to be in Phoenix.
Absolutely. Amen to that. And I think that you are 100% correct. And another blessing in that as well is that the Suns now have Mat Ishbia as their owner and not a man named Robert Sarver.
That is right. Obviously, we want to end this episode on a good note, and I think a lot of the discussions we had would be perceived as a good note. But before we get out of here, I think it would be good to talk about what if this trade does not happen, because we don't know if this trade is going to happen. Obviously, we've given our opinions on how we would feel if it did happen, but it's no sure thing that this deal does get made. There's a lot of teams that are going to be in the mix. So we want to talk about what do the Suns pivot to if Bradley Beal does not become a member of the Suns. So Ryan, what do you think the Suns where do you think the Suns should pivot to if this trade does not get made?
Well, I'll tell you what, I think that I wouldn't be surprised if the Suns would have interest in another Wizards player, and that is Kyle Kuzma. I know we brought him up in a trade scenario, a trade package scenario that involved Bradley Beal, but he's a guy that he played under Frank Vogel when he was in Los Angeles. He's a great role player to have on your team. He can rebound. He's a pretty decent shooter. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Suns would potentially look at Kyle Kuzma in a potential trade package deal. And then I wouldn't also be surprised if we would see the Suns trade DA away for potential other role players on this team because that's what I think the Suns need is role players. You obviously have your solid 1-2 guys in Book and KD. We know that we've already talked about that, but I'd be looking at maybe getting like a few solid shooters to go and build around because that's something that the Suns desperately need. Is shooting because that was one of their biggest weaknesses all season long. I also wouldn't be surprised, and I know we touched upon this a couple episodes ago about the Suns also potentially looking at bringing a guy back like TJ Warren or Terrence Ross, especially if you can maybe sign Terrence Ross on the mid-level exception or the vet minimum. Same thing goes for TJ Warren, although I highly doubt that, just given that, I mean, he's proven that he can be solid in this league, and I would have to expect that he would command a heck of a lot more money than probably just a mid-level exception or the veterans minimum deal. So, basic conclusion, I would look for them to go and maybe get maybe that one third solid role player on the team, while also looking at re-signing a few of their guys that you already have on the team, and also looking to add some shooters as well.
Yeah, I agree. I was actually gonna say Kuzma as well. I thought even before this Beal stuff went down today, I had Kuzma high on my list of guys that I would like to see on the Suns. I think the interest kind of goes back to last year before the Kevin Durant trade. Kuzma was a guy I believe the Suns were targeting. I know there's mutual interest there. So I think Kuzma would be great fit, especially um in this scenario if they're able to bring back Chris Paul on a cheaper contract. I think the center position remains to be seen. Maybe it's Ayton, maybe it's another guy, but Chris Paul, Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, Kyle Kuzma, it's a pretty solid group of guys there. And obviously we talked about us being excited for Bradley Beal, but in terms of how the contracts are throughout the roster, I think having a guy like Kuzma on, like a high teens, low $20 million a year guy, as well as other solid depth pieces would be a wonderful fit. I think that would be a very good team. I think it'd be better than last year's team. And then obviously you mentioned role players and shooting. I also think that's important, but another thing I would like to see is in this scenario, if they were to add another solid third option, I would like to see them try to, figure out a way to sneak into either the lottery or just late in the first round and try to get, a solid rookie to have that you're confident enough in to be in the rotation. And, a reason why I'm so high on that possibility is because of the impact we saw from Christian Brown from the Nuggets in the finals. I mean, he
Yeah.
he was in his first year. He's coming off the national championship in Kansas, and now he wins the finals in his first year. So,
Go
I
figure,
mean,
man. That's a heck of a rookie season to have.
yeah, definitely. I mean, every time I turn the finals on or just the playoffs on in general, I mean, he's diving on the ground for loose balls. He's hustling on both ends of the floor. So I think just having just a young guy who's just willing to do the dirty work, um, could go a long ways for this team. Obviously this team is, in the hunt for a championship every single year. So having a guy who's never been in the NBA before is definitely a risk. But I mean, you saw the reward with Christian Brown. So if the Suns are able to, whether that's in a Deandre Ayton trade or not, I think being able to get into the first round, whether it's like I said, the late lottery or just the end of the first round, I think that would be a good option for the Phoenix.
Good stuff. Yeah, interesting scenarios as well. I mean, yeah, we'll see what transpires in the next coming days or even the next week or so. Alrighty, folks, that's going to do it for us here today. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Valley Experience, an Arizona sports podcast between two diehard Arizona sports fans. I'm Ryan Pasiecznik alongside, as always, Logan Lober. Thank you so much for listening, and make sure to go and follow us on the Valley Experience on Instagram and Twitter. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, and remember, keep on showing love for whether that be AZ sports teams or just sports in general. We appreciate you guys a lot. Thank you for your contributions and for tuning in.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. We look forward to seeing you guys again in the future, and check out our last episodes. Obviously, Ryan mentioned the social media accounts. Best way to keep up with the podcast. We post clips from the podcast, updates about the podcast, updates about all the sports teams here in the Valley. So great way to keep in touch with us. It's the Valley XP. It's both Instagram and Twitter. And we have, obviously, if you're watching us right now, you can see us on YouTube, or if you're just listening to us, that's anywhere you find your podcast. So thank you guys all for tuning in, and we will see you all in the next one.